More moves coming for the Vikings as reports reveal a huge update concerning a big necessity for the team. But first, the 53-man roster is finally here and full of surprises to dive into as Vikings fans are beyond hype for this season. We're going to break down all that in this episode of Vikings Digest. But first, if you're enjoying this Vikings content, you're not a part of the 12% of viewers who are already subscribed yet and you want to stay up to date, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you don't miss any of the episodes as they drop. And with that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is that the 53-man roster is in. So, like all the teams today, this was the deadline for all the 53-man rosters to be submitted. And these are just the initial ones with a lot of players being placed on waivers or released or cut and things like that. But Minnesota released their full 53-man roster here. And we'll start with the offensive side of the ball. You see there with the quarterbacks, J.J. McCarthy, Max Brosmer, and Carson Wentz as the three quarterbacks. Max Brosmer having a fantastic preseason and is going to be potentially a QB2 at times. Who knows? Maybe it's just because of the alphabetical order. Maybe it's not as this order on the depth sheet, but maybe just because Carson Wentz got there. Who knows? But Max Brosmer making the 53-man roster. Absolutely love to see it. Then you go on to the running backs there. Of course, you got Aaron Jones, you got Ty Chandler and Jordan Mason. And then Xavier Scott as well, who had a really solid preseason as well, making the appearance there as the fourth running back on the team. On the fullback side, CJ Ham was placed on injured reserve, but will be designated for return. So he does have to sit out 4 weeks before they can put him back on the practice field and activate him off the injured reserve. Then, of course, you move there to the wide receivers. You got Justin Jefferson, Jalen Nailor, Ty Felton, Tim Jones, and Miles Price. Jordan Addison is not there because of the suspension. We'll see that later on down this list. But there you have Ty Felton making the list. Lucky Jackson did not make it, unfortunately. Then you have Miles Price as well, who is somebody that Kevin O'Connell is very excited about his potential as far as special teams goes, especially if he can make a guy miss. Then, of course, you got there in the tight ends, TJ Hawkinson, Josh Oliver. Moving on to the offensive line is where we get a few more surprises as well. Of course, you got Christian Darrisaw, Donovan Jackson, the first-round draft pick, Ryan Kelly, Will Fries, Brian O'Neill. But then you also have undrafted Joe Huber also making the 53-man roster, which is so awesome to see because this guy is an absolute tank. And I'm so happy that not only was Minnesota able to get an undrafted gem like this, and same in Max Brosmer as well, but both of these undrafted guys making the team, you love to see it. And like Paul Allen was saying as well on the Vikings YouTube channel reacting to it, is that you can't really name a quarterback in the past couple of years that has been undrafted and made the 53-man roster after a really solid preseason. Brosmer definitely has that chip on his shoulder, and Kevin O'Connell and the scouting team did an absolute great job at bringing this kid in here. Cannot wait to see what he's able to do, even if it's as a backup and just in seeing him in the preseason, or just in some, like maybe if we're clinching a division and he has to play in a nothing game and just goes out and balls out. Awesome to see and reliable safety valve to have should Carson Wentz or J.J. McCarthy get hurt. It's just nice to have that extra insurance, I guess, especially when Minnesota absolutely needs depth. But Joe Huber was, to me, the biggest surprise and the biggest delight to see make the list, as well as Brosmer was a massive delight. But Joe Huber as well, this guy is going to be insane if he's given opportunities in Minnesota. And I think his development, his growth being in Minnesota, absolutely fantastic, especially when you look at some of the other guys on the offensive line depth as far as backups go. I think he really stands out as someone who could really excel and be the best of those backups in there. But moving on to the defensive side of the ball, you have on the defensive line there, of course, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, Jalen Redmond. Then you got Ty Ingram, Dawkins, Levi Drake Rodriguez, and Elijah Williams. Outside linebackers, you got Grenard, you got Van Ginkel, you got Dallas Turner as well. You got Chaz Chambliss and Bo Richter. And then there was a note that Tyler Batty was placed on injured reserve and was designated for return. Then, of course, inside linebackers, Blake Cashman, Ivan Pace Jr., Kobe King, Eric Wilson, and Austin Keys. Corners, Byron Murphy, Isaiah Rogers, Dwight McGlothern, and Jeff Okudah. So, of course, with Mekhi Blackman being taken out of that picture, he was not making the team, but Jeff Okudah, of course, is there. Safeties, Josh Metellus, Harry the Hitman Smith, Theo Jackson, Tavier Thomas, and Jay Ward. It's going to be very interesting to see what Theo Jackson does in his first full season with Minnesota. I know that Kwesi and Brian Flores are really high on what this guy can do. Then in the specialists, you got long snapper Angelo DePaolo, Will Reichard, and Ryan Wright. Nothing has changed there from last year. But moving on to the guys that were waived as well, they waived 15 players and terminated the contracts of 4 players. You see there with the list there where some guys like Lucky Jackson was on there, Tyre Thomas. There were some other ones there too, like Dante Fleming. There was on the defensive side with Gabriel Murphy as well. So there was a bit of casualties here and some contracts terminated with Nick Vannett, Giovanni Ricci, Jonathan Harris, and Ambry Thomas. But with these teams' contracts, these terminations and these waivers happening, teams have until Wednesday to claim players who were waived and can also sign up to 16 players for their practice squads, 17 if one is an international player pathway participant. Veterans with at least 4 accrued NFL seasons whose contracts were terminated by clubs are free to sign at any point. So some of the guys that did unfortunately get waived or their contracts terminated by the Vikings, maybe they bring them back on practice squad. Lucky Jackson is somebody that they might bring back. Who knows? I know he didn't have the greatest preseason, but there still is room for some of these guys to potentially come back, especially if there are injuries. But as well as some other moves that they made on this day with a lot of roster cuts in the deadline was CJ Ham and Tyler Batty getting placed on injured reserve but designated for return. Jordan Addison getting that suspension starting to serve now. And then the Vikings moving Gavin Bartholomew onto the active/physically unable to perform to reserve and PUP list. So now they have all their moves kind of set in a row. And now the stage is set for Minnesota to go out and do what they need to do, and that is go and get more guys as more moves are coming. So we saw earlier today where a lot of teams were making roster cuts. Some of them were surprising, some of them were not surprising. 2 of which that we're going to touch on right here is Hunter Renfrow and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, the Seahawks releasing MVS, and the Panthers cutting Hunter Renfrow. Hunter Renfrow is working on his comeback tour, joining the Panthers with another wide receiver very similar to him in Adam Thielen, a very shifty route runner. And now the Panthers have made their decision as who of those older veterans that they're going to go with, and they chose Adam Thielen, especially when Minnesota was trying to trade to get him back. And now they are parting ways with Hunter Renfrow, who will be back on the free agency block to be signed by a team and be given another chance on this comeback tour. And then Marquez Valdes-Scantling, where the Seahawks, they didn't want to have the wide receiver depth, and they chose to move on from him. And he was somebody that does present some opportunities in that. And then we've seen as well earlier in this week with Diana Rossini saying that the Vikings, the Steelers, the Jets, they're all trying to find a wide receiver. We've seen the Kwesi Adofo-Mensah come out and say that we need to go get another wide receiver. And then we have Ian Rappaport or Tom Pelissero, and Adam Schefter, I should say, coming out and saying that these guys are now available. This is great news for the Minnesota Vikings. I know Jakobi Meyers is the biggest buzz name going around because of the trade request and how Minnesota would absolutely love to have a guy like that. And we dropped a video on that if you want to go and check it out, what Kirk thought about the idea of bringing Jakobi Meyers into Minnesota. But looking at Hunter Renfrow and Marquez Valdes-Scantling, these are some guys that I would feel comfortable with Minnesota going out and signing. Hunter Renfrow, again, the health is a very big concern, especially considering the condition that he was dealing with. But before that happened, he was producing at a pretty good rate, especially in that 1,000-yard season in 2021. Me personally, I had him in fantasy that year, and he did great at helping me win a championship that year. But since then, it has been a bit of a dip for him where he had to take a back seat with the Raiders, and then his health really hit the skids, and he wasn't able to kind of get back to that form. But then you look at MVS on the other side of the ball. If the Vikings are looking for an actual veteran, Marquez Valdes-Scantling is that guy out of these 2 players, because you have his time in Green Bay, you have that time in Kansas City where he went to the Super Bowl and won one, and as well in Buffalo and New Orleans. So there is some opportunities here for him to have a bounce back. In New Orleans, he didn't have a lot of great stats, but those 385 yards, they were coming in massive chunks. He was a guy that was kind of a waiver wire gold mine in certain weeks, where if you had him, he was giving you 30 points, 24 points on certain occasions if he was in the game plan or was able to get free on a deep route. He was a big shot threat. Minnesota could use a guy like that. I would like to get more of a slot and possession type guy, but if we can get another deep threat to go with Justin Jefferson and kind of take the attention away from him, I'm okay with that. And MVS does produce a lot of capabilities there. Even in those 8 games for the Saints, just for 35 targets and 17 catches, he was able to get 4 touchdowns, which is kind of insane looking at that in hindsight, because within the Saints, they were a terrible team last year, playing with a revolving door of quarterbacks, almost like Minnesota was a couple seasons ago. And in 385 yards and 4 touchdowns in 8 games, I know it's not crazy, but when you look at what he was doing over the past couple of seasons in a small sample size, that's a lot of production, and it goes to show that he still has some game left in him. So this is somebody that, if we're looking at Hunter Renfrow or Marquez Valdes-Scantling, I'm going towards Scantling in this situation just because the numbers speak for themselves. He is a lot healthier. Yeah, he's a bit older, but that health is a major concern with Hunter Renfrow. And you do have another deep threat to kind of take the attention away from Justin Jefferson, because this is a guy where Marquez Valdes-Scantling, you look at the longest yards of his catches, you have a 71-yard bomb there last season. Then you have a 57, 75, 78, 74, 60. This is a guy who can be a deep threat for Minnesota and can really catch teams off guard with just his ability. He's a really good hands. He's a good route runner, and he can really get free on those deep balls, which could fool a lot of safeties. So that'd be very interesting to see. And hopefully Minnesota goes and gets another wide receiver like this. I'm still preaching at the top of my lungs for Tyler Boyd to come to Minnesota. Gabe Davis also would be a really good option. But I think Marquez Valdes-Scantling, if we're looking at potential wide receiver options to come to Minnesota, I'd probably put him at number 5 or 6 on that list as far as the most that I would want. But as far as the most likely, he might be in the top 3 in that scenario, just because you wouldn't have to give up anything to go get him other than cap space. Maybe the Vikings go and get 2 of them. Who knows? Because a week ago, they weren't knowing that this was going to be the landscape for wide receivers. Now you have 2 more wide receivers available on top of the ones currently already available. Then you go out and get 2 of them. That would be okay with me, and Minnesota can make some more roster moves as a result of that. But what do you guys think about this down in the comments below? What did you guys think about the 53-man roster? Brosmer making it, Huber making it, some other ones that didn't make it and got waived that you were surprised got waived. And between Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Hunter Renfrow, which one would you guys rather see in purple with the Minnesota Vikings? But that's going to do it for this episode of Vikings Digest. I've been your host, Griffin. Take care.